The funeral of Chairman Park Min-sik was a meticulously orchestrated affair until the doors opened and she walked in. 8 years after his family paid her to vanish, she stood in the aisle holding the hands of 2 small children, and as every head turned, the impossible truth became visible. The twins looked exactly like the chairman's grieving son. In her hand, she held not flowers, but the original check. It had never been cashed. Her name was Yoon Jae, an American English teacher who a decade ago fell for the heir to the Park fortune. Their secret relationship was a problem the family solved with a suitcase of cash and a one-way ticket. Her return today was an impossibility, which means she isn't here for condolences. She's here to settle a debt the Park family thought was paid in full. And as she moves down the aisle, the check held like a verdict, one question hangs over the entire room. What did their money actually buy? It began not in a boardroom, but in a classroom. In 2012, Park Jun was the dutiful son, sent to America not just for an MBA, but for polish. Yoon Jae was his volunteer conversation partner, a first-generation Korean American who thought she was helping with idioms. What she was really doing was dismantling every wall he'd ever built. For June, life was a series of pre-approved boxes: school, company, marriage, heir. Yoon Jae's world was built on different questions. Who are you when no one is watching? What do you actually want? Questions he had no ready answers for. Their weekly sessions stretched into coffee, then dinners, then something neither could define but both feared to name. He was the crown prince of Park Global, a conglomerate with tentacles in semiconductors, construction, and department stores. She was the daughter of a mechanic and a librarian, paying her way through a teaching degree. In the calculus of his family, they didn't add up. But for 18 months, in a small apartment near campus, they built a secret world. It was the happiest either of them had ever been, and it was a ticking bomb. The pressure point had a name: Madam Park, Jun's mother. While the chairman built the empire, she built the dynasty. Her life's work was the preservation and elevation of the Park bloodline, a project that required strategic marriages, impeccable public perception, and absolute control. A foreign daughter-in-law, especially one without wealth or lineage, was not a person. It was a crisis, a vulnerability to be excised. Jun knew the storm was coming. He believed he could weather it. He had a plan. He would prove his worth at the company, secure his position, and then present Yoon Jae not as a problem, but as his chosen solution. It was a naive calculus. He underestimated how much his parents saw him not as a person, but as the central asset of their legacy. The first crack appeared not from his family, but from hers. Yoon Jae's father fell ill. The medical bills began to mount. She took extra shifts, her stress a silent third presence in their apartment. June, wanting to help but forbidden from using his family accounts in any traceable way, could only watch. The feeling of helplessness ate at him. It was the first real test of a love that had only known sunny weather. Then, in the spring of 2014, Yoon Jae missed a period. The positive test sat on the edge of the bathroom sink, a little plastic oracle. Their fear was eclipsed by a terrifying, brilliant hope. This, June said, holding her, would change everything. A child was a fact, a new branch on the family tree. They would have to accept it. He was wrong. He had mistaken a dynasty for a family. When Madam Park found out, it wasn't an argument. It was a negotiation. June was summoned to Seoul under the pretense of a board emergency. He walked into the penthouse office to find not just his parents, but the family lawyer. The terms were laid out with the cold efficiency of a merger gone sour. Yoon Jae was a liability. The pregnancy was a catastrophe, but it was also, his mother noted, a containable one. They presented the solution: a generous financial settlement. $1.5 million wired to an offshore account. In return, Yoon Jae would terminate the pregnancy, sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement, and cease all contact. Permanently, June refused. He shouted, he pleaded. He was met with serene, immovable logic. If he pursued this, he would be cut off, disinherited. His position at the company given to a cousin. His access to capital vanished. And then his mother asked softly, how would he help his beloved Yoon Jae and her sick father? How would he raise a child with no name, no support, and a mother drowning in debt? It was an elegant trap. They weren't just threatening his future. They were threatening his ability to be the man he promised her he could be. Back in America, Yoon Jae waited. The calls became shorter. June's voice strained. He spoke of complications, of needing more time. The hope in her began to curdle into a dread she couldn't name. Then the doorbell rang. It was June. It was a Korean man in an impeccable suit, accompanied by a female associate. They introduced themselves as representatives of the Park family interests. They were polite, unnervingly so. They offered condolences for her father's health. They acknowledged her relationship with June, and then they presented the offer, not 1.5 but $2 million. The condition was simpler and crueler. She would disappear. She would have the child, but she would raise it or them with no claim, no contact, and no mention of the Park name. The money was for her silence and her absence. It was not a request. It was a transaction. To emphasize the point, the man slid a dossier across her coffee table. Inside were detailed reports on her father's medical prognosis, the total of her family's debts, and a list of prestigious teaching fellowships in Europe that had mysteriously just been offered to her. The message was clear: take the money and the clean exit, or watch every door around her slam shut. The night she called June to tell him about the visit, his silence told her everything. His voice was hollow, defeated. He said, "I can't protect you from them." He didn't say, "Fight with me." He said, "The money would solve everything for your family." In that moment, Yoonjae didn't just feel heartbreak. She felt a fundamental reordering of her reality. The man she loved was not stronger than the system that made him. Her love, her future, her child had been given a price tag. And the man who was supposed to be her partner was suggesting she consider it. She hung up the phone. She looked at the suitcase the representatives had left, filled with bundles of cash, as a good faith gesture. She felt the child move inside her for the first time, a flutter, a tiny, defiant kick, and she made a decision that would define the next 8 years of her life. She would take the money, every last dollar, but she would not spend it. She would let them believe they had bought her silence. She would let them believe they had won. She would disappear just as they asked, but she would keep their receipt. Yoonjae vanished into a life designed to be untraceable. She used a fraction of the money to pay her father's medical debts, then boarded a plane to France with a new name and a single swelling secret. She deposited the rest of the Park family's money into a secured trust account, where it would gather dust and interest untouched. The physical check, however, she kept, laminated, a tombstone for the woman she used to be. In Lyon, she became Claire. She rented a small apartment near a park and enrolled in a midwifery program. It was a conscious choice to be surrounded by beginnings, by the raw, uncomplicated truth of new life. The work was hard, the hours long, but it gave her a purpose that was entirely her own. No one knew her history. No one asked about the father. In the quiet of her apartment, she prepared for the birth alone with a ferocity that surprised her. She was building a fortress, not just a nursery. The ultrasound at 20 weeks changed everything. The technician, smiling, pointed at the screen. "You see there and there, 2 heartbeats, twins," a double betrayal of the Park family's careful plans. A surge of primal fear was quickly overtaken by a wave of fierce, unbreakable joy. They had tried to erase a single problem. They had created a dynasty of their own without their permission. She gave birth to a boy and a girl, Minjun and Sumin, in a bright French hospital room with only a kind midwife by her side. The first time she held them both, their tiny fists clutching her fingers, the last piece of her old heart sealed over. They were not a secret to be hidden. They were a truth waiting for its moment. Back in Seoul, Park Jun's life became the blueprint his parents had drawn. His rebellion had been extinguished, replaced by a numb, functional obedience. 6 months after Yoonjae disappeared, he was introduced to Choi Hae-jin, the daughter of a rival conglomerate family. It was a merger disguised as a marriage. The wedding was a national event, splashed across business and society pages. The photos showed a handsome, poised couple. They did not show the emptiness in Jun's eyes. Hae-jin was not a villain. She was another piece on the board, raised with the same expectations. Their marriage was a quiet, mutually understood contract. Separate bedrooms, public appearances. The production of a single heir, a son named Jae-hoon, born exactly 11 months after the wedding. Jun threw himself into the company, expanding the Park empire with a cold, relentless efficiency that made his father proud. He became a ghost in his own home, a stranger to his own son. The only part of him that remained alive was a locked drawer in his office desk. Inside, a single, grainy photo from a security camera showing Yoonjae walking into the airport terminal, her hand resting on her stomach. He looked at it every day. It was his punishment. For 8 years, the two worlds spun on separate axes, never meant to collide. Yoonjae built a beautiful, resilient life. She qualified as a midwife, known for her calm and her compassion. Minjun and Sumin grew into bright, curious children who spoke fluent French and Korean, who knew their asterisk Appa was a kind man who lived far away and couldn't be with them. She turned the lie into a fairy tale to protect them, but she never let them forget where they came from. She showed them pictures of Seoul, taught them about their heritage, and kept the laminated check in a fireproof box, along with their birth certificates. It was their inheritance, not the money, but the proof of what had been done. The first crack in the Park family's facade appeared not from outside, but from within. Jun's son Jae-hoon was a delicate, sensitive child who preferred painting to pre-approved sports. Madam Park saw this as a correctable flaw. Jun saw himself. The pressure on the boy began to mount: extra tutors, forced social engagements, constant criticism. One night, Jun found his 7-year-old son crying in his room, holding a ripped painting of a blue bird. "Halmione says it's useless," Jae-hoon whispered. In that moment, Jun saw the cycle repeating. He saw his own father's disappointment, his mother's cold engineering, and the wreckage of his own happiness. The ghost of Yoon-jae and the unknown child he'd been forced to abandon haunted him with renewed force. What had his capitulation bought? A son who was already breaking under the same weight. He began a quiet, reckless investigation. He used private contacts, bypassing the family's usual security channels. He was looking for a grave, expecting to find a record of a single child born in America, perhaps given up for adoption. What he found, after months of digging and a substantial bribe to a data broker, was a birth record from Lyon, France, for twins, date of birth aligning perfectly, mother's name, Claire Lee. But attached to the file was an old, digitized visa photo. It was Yoon-jae. The shock was physical, a punch to the chest that left him gasping. Twins. She had been carrying *2 lives. His family's money had tried to silence 2 heartbeats, and she had kept them. She had raised them, alone. Confronting his mother was a detonation he had avoided for a decade. He stormed into her private salon, the printouts in his hand. Madam Park listened, her expression not one of shock, but of icy recalculation. When he finished, her first question was not, "Are they okay?" It was, "Who else knows?" Jun realized then that the woman before him was incapable of seeing his children as grandchildren. They were operational security risks. "You will do nothing," she stated. Any acknowledgement legitimizes their claim. It endangers Jae-hoon's position. It destabilizes everything. Jun looked at her, truly looked, and saw not a parent, but a CEO of a family assessing liabilities. "They are my children," he said, his voice trembling with a fury he didn't know he still possessed. "You made me complicit in abandoning them." Her reply was sterile. "We protected you. We protected this family. That woman took the money. She made her choice." Jun dropped the final piece of information, the one he'd saved. "She never cashed the check, Mother. The entire 2 million. It's still sitting in a trust. She kept it as evidence." For the first time, Madam Park's composure flickered. The money was not just money, it was the foundation of the transaction. An uncashed check was not a settlement. It was a debt suspended. It was proof the deal was never closed. Jun left, his mind a storm. He hired a discreet firm in France to find them, not to make contact, just to confirm they were safe and well. The report that came back included photos: Minjun and Sumin playing in a park, Yoon-jae, her hair longer, smiling as she watched them. They were radiant, they were whole, and they looked unmistakably like him. The boy had his exact jawline. The girl, his mother's eyes, but with Yoon-jae's warm expression. The ghost was no longer a memory. It was 2 living, breathing pieces of his soul, living a world away. The report also contained a financial summary. Yoon-jae lived modestly on her midwife's salary. The trust account, bearing the original sum plus 8 years of compound interest, remained undisturbed. His world split in 2. The gilded cage of his soul life became unbearable. He started missing mandatory family functions. He withdrew further from Hai-jin, who watched him with her own quiet resignation. The only person he spoke to was his younger sister, Mina, the one family member who had always questioned the family's cold calculus. He showed her the photos. Mina, who had grown up under the same pressure, cried. "You have to bring them home," she said, but Jun was paralyzed. To bring them into the Park world was to feed them to the machine that had broken him. To leave his position and run to France was to abandon Jae-hoon to that same machine. He was trapped by his own inaction 8 years prior. The decision was made for him. Chairman Park Min-sik, the patriarch, the architect of it all, suffered a massive stroke. The family empire went into emergency mode. June, as the heir was thrust into a whirlwind of board meetings, legal filings, and press management. In the chaotic weeks that followed, his father lingered in a coma. The funeral, the family knew, would be a global spectacle, a gathering of power where every face, every gesture would be scrutinized. Security plans were drafted. The guest list was a diplomatic puzzle. It was during one of these grim planning sessions that Madam Park issued a final, chilling order to June. This is the most vulnerable moment our family has ever faced. Any hint of scandal, of unresolved personal matters, would be catastrophic. You will not attempt to make contact. You will not acknowledge anything. Is that clear? Her eyes held the full weight of the dynasty. It was not a question, it was a command. John nodded, his silence once again bought with the currency of duty and fear. But in Lyon, Yoonjae was also watching the news. The impending death of Chairman Park was international business news. She saw the reports on the financial networks. She saw June's face, somber and strained, standing outside the hospital. And she looked at her children, now 8 years old, asking questions about their Korean grandfather that were becoming harder to answer with fairy tales. The fireproof box called to her. The laminated check, the original sin. The Park family believed their account was settled. They believed silence was compliance. They believed she had accepted her erasure. Yoonjae knew that the moment of their greatest public performance, the funeral, was also the moment of their greatest blindness. They would be looking outward at rivals and the press. They would not be looking for a ghost from a closed file. It was time to return their receipt. It was time to show them what their money had actually purchased. She booked 3 tickets to Seoul. The return date was open. The Hanwoo Memorial Hall was a fortress of black cars and silent bodyguards. Every camera was trained on the arriving dignitaries. No one noticed the woman in the simple black dress and pearls, holding the hands of 2 children, approaching from the quiet side street. The family's security plan was perfect. It just wasn't designed for a threat that looked like a grieving mother. Yoonjae walked through the main doors, the twins flanking her, their small hands in hers. The murmur of the crowded hall dipped, then died in a wave, starting at the back and rolling toward the altar. All eyes turned. The sea of black-clad mourners parted. At the front, June stood beside his father's portrait, frozen, his wife Hae-jin beside him, her hand tightening on their son Jae-hoon's shoulder. Madam Park, draped in traditional mourning robes, turned slowly. Her face, a mask of dignified grief, did not change. But her eyes, for one fraction of a second, reflected not shock, but a pure, incendiary rage. Then it was gone, smoothed back into marble. Yoonjae did not look at them. She looked straight ahead, walking her children down the long aisle toward the coffin as if in a procession. The click of her heels was the only sound. Minjun and Sumin, confused but trusting their mother completely, walked with a quiet solemnity. They stopped a few feet from the family. Yoonjae bowed deeply once to the portrait of the chairman. Then she turned, not to June but to Madam Park. She reached into her clutch purse. The entire hall held its breath. She didn't pull out a weapon. She pulled out a single laminated rectangle. She held it up so the light glinted off the plastic. The check. She took 2 steps forward and placed it carefully, deliberately on the edge of the chairman's closed coffin, a returned invoice. The symbolism was atomic. Then and only then did she speak, her voice clear and calm, carrying in the silence. You paid for a silence I never agreed to sell. The account is unsettled. These are your grandchildren. She placed a gentle hand on each child's head. Minjun and Sumin, the dam broke. 100 smartphones were raised. The press at the back, initially barred from the family section, surged against the ropes. Flashbulbs exploded. The dignified funeral of a titan had just become the scandal of the decade. Chaos erupted, but it was a contained, muffled chaos. Family aides and security moved to block cameras, creating a human wall around the Park family and Yoonjae. But the image was already out. The woman, the twins, the check on the coffin. June finally broke from his paralysis. He took a step toward them, his expression shattered. Yoonjae, he breathed. Madam Park's voice, low and razor-sharp, cut through the din. Security, escort this disturbance to a private room. Now. It was not a request. 2 large men in suits moved toward Yoonjae. June threw out an arm. You will not touch them. The standoff, father and son, played out in front of the nation's elite. In that moment of fracture, Yoonjae looked at June, not with love, not with hatred, but with a profound, weary pity. It's all right, she said to him, then to the guards. We'll go. She turned and walked back up the aisle, children in hand, following the guards to a side chamber. leaving the check lying on the coffin like a flag planted on conquered land. The private room was an antechamber, soundproofed, elegant. The door closed, muffling the erupting scandal outside. It contained Madam Park, June, Hai-jin, the family lawyer, and Yoon-jae with the twins. Hai-jin stared at the children, then at her husband, her face a blank page of betrayal. Madam Park spoke first, ignoring Yoon-jae entirely, addressing her son. "You will go out there. You will say this woman is a deluded former acquaintance, that her claims are baseless, that we are dealing with it privately out of respect for your father." June laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "Look at them, mother, look at their faces. You can't lie about DNA. We can delay it," the lawyer interjected, sweating. "We can demand tests, use the courts, buy time. The immediate narrative is what matters." Yoon-jae finally spoke, kneeling to comfort the twins who were clinging to her. "I didn't come for a narrative. I came to return what was yours, and to tell you that your transaction failed." She looked at Madam Park. "You wanted no claim made. By bringing them here, by naming them publicly, I have made the claim. The money is yours. The silence is over." But here, where Yoon-jae's 8-year plan met a variable she hadn't fully calculated, the law, the family lawyer Mr. Kim saw a narrow path. "The non-disclosure agreement you signed is ironclad," he said to Yoon-jae. "By disclosing the relationship and the payment, you are liable for damages exceeding the original sum by a factor of 10. You have just bankrupted yourself." Yoon-jae smiled, a small, tired smile. She opened her purse again and took out another document, a notarized copy. This NDA was signed under duress, with coercion documented in the form of the check itself, an attempt to influence a pregnancy. Furthermore, it was signed to conceal paternity and defraud these children of their legal rights of kinship and support. Any family court in the world will tear it to pieces. "In fact," she said, looking at June, "I am here to establish paternity formally so that my children can know their father if he wishes to know them." The power in the room shifted. She wasn't just a scorned woman, she was a plaintiff. June fell to his knees in front of the twins. He didn't care about the lawyers, his mother, his wife. He looked into their faces, his own eyes brimming. "Hello," he whispered in Korean. Soo-min, the braver of the two, tilted her head. "Are you our asterisk appa from the pictures?" she asked. June nodded, unable to speak. Min-jun studied him seriously. "You look sad," he stated. "I am," June choked out. "I've been very, very sad for a long time." Hai-jin watched this, her hand over her mouth. Her own son, Jae-hoon, was outside, bewildered. Her marriage, a facade, was now publicly obliterated. Her social position was crumbling in real time. But in her eyes, alongside the humiliation, there was a dawning, horrified empathy for the woman and the two children who were also victims of the same monstrous family machine. Madam Park watched her son's capitulation with cold fury. Her leverage was slipping. Then she played her last, desperate card. She turned to Yoon-jae. "You think this is a victory? You have made them targets. Every rival, every tabloid, every gold digger in the country now sees them. You have dragged them from a safe, quiet life into a war zone for what? A principle?" It was a brutal point. Yoon-jae pulled her children closer. "A quiet life built on a lie is not safe. It's a prison. They deserve the truth. They deserve their name, if they want it. And they deserve to know that their father was too weak to fight for them, so their mother had to be strong enough for everyone." The words were a direct blow to June, who flinched. The door opened. It was Mina, June's sister. She slipped in, her face pale. "The press has the photos. It's led every news broadcast. The board is calling an emergency meeting. They're talking about succession instability." She looked at the twins, and her expression softened with instant antly affection. Then she looked at her mother. "It's over, Eoma asterisk. You can't control this." Madam Park finally shattered, not into tears, but into a cold, strategic retreat. "Get them out of the country," she commanded the lawyer. "Back to France, set up a structure, a trust fund larger than the last, a formal legal acknowledgement with sealed records." She was trying to re-establish the terms to turn this back into a transaction. June stood up. "No," the word was quiet but final. "They stay here in Seoul with me." Hai-jin spoke for the first time, her voice thin but clear. "And what is with you, June? Where does that leave your actual son? Where does that leave me?" The room fragmented into a dozen conflicting tragedies. In the midst of it, little Soo-min, who had been watching the adults with intelligent eyes, walked over to Hai-jin. She didn't say anything. She just took the woman's trembling hand and held it. The simple, unexpected humanity of the gesture broke Hai-jin. She sank into a chair and wept. Minjun approached his grandmother, Madame Park, who looked down at him as if he were a fascinating, dangerous insect. Halmione, he said, using the honorific for grandmother. Why are you so angry? We just wanted to meet you. For the second time that day, Madame Park's armor was pierced, not by strategy, but by the unassailable logic of a child. She had no answer. The door burst open again, this time from external pressure. A team of reporters, having overwhelmed the security cordon, shoved cameras into the doorway. The private crisis was now fully, irreversibly public. The last image the world saw before security finally dragged the doors closed was a tableau of a family in ruins. A weeping wife, a kneeling heir, a formidable matriarch staring down a grandson, and a woman from the past, standing protectively between her children and the storm, the ghost of a check still lying on a coffin down the hall. The transaction was null and void, but the cost of voiding it was about to be paid by everyone in the room. The war for the Park legacy had just begun, and the first battle was lost before it even started. The real question now was not about the past, but the future. What kind of family would be built from the ashes of this one? In the days after the funeral, the Park Empire didn't just face a scandal, it faced a legal and spiritual partition. The photo of the twins became inescapable. Their resemblance to June was a fact no PR firm could spin. The uncashed check, now a viral symbol, transformed from a private receipt into public evidence of coercion. The board's emergency meeting lasted 17 hours. The central question was no longer about morality, but stability. June, to everyone's surprise, did not beg for his position. He presented a proposal. He would voluntarily step aside from the day-to-day leadership of Park Global, accepting a role as chairman of the non-core holdings, a significant demotion. In exchange, the board would formally acknowledge his paternity of Minjun and Sumin and approve the creation of equal, separate trusts for all three of his children, funded from his personal shareholding. It was a staggering concession of power for a guarantee of legitimacy. The board, desperate to quarantine the scandal and preserve the core business, agreed. Madame Park was outvoted in her own boardroom for the first time in her life. June's next act was to file for divorce from Haijin. It was uncontested, swift, and astonishingly amicable. In private, Haijin had confessed she felt a grim relief. The gilded cage had a door now. As part of the settlement, she received a substantial stake in a Park subsidiary and full custody of Jaehoon, with June granted generous visitation. Freed from the performance of a marriage, a surprising friendship began to form between the two women who had both been wounded by the same family. Haijin reached out to Yoonjae, not with hostility, but with a shared understanding. "I am sorry," she said simply, "for the world you were brought into." They met for tea, the twins and Jaehoon playing in the next room. The children, unaware of the decades of pressure that had shaped the adults, became fast friends. Jaehoon, at last, had playmates who didn't see him as the heir to anything. For Yoonjae, the legal battles were brisk and decisive. The non-disclosure agreement was voided by the courts, ruled as unconscionable and contrary to public policy for its attempt to conceal parentage. The original $2 million plus interest was legally deemed hers. She didn't keep it. She used it to establish two foundations. The first, in her mother's name, provided grants for single parents pursuing education in healthcare. The second, more quietly, offered legal aid to women in Korea facing coercive family settlements. She returned the money, but on her own terms, turning the instrument of her silence into a megaphone for others. June moved out of the family penthouse and into a home with a garden close to good schools. He asked Yoonjae and the twins to stay in Seoul, not for him, but so the children could be near their brother, their Aunt Mina, and their heritage. He made no romantic demands. He understood he had forfeited that right 8 years prior. His role, he told her, was to be the most present, attentive father he could possibly be to all three of his children. He started showing up. To school plays, to soccer games, to help with homework. He learned to tie double knots. The man who had been a ghost became relentlessly, gratefully physical in his children's lives. Madame Park retreated to the family's countryside estate, a figure of diminished influence. The dynasty she had polished to a mirror finish was now publicly fractured. Her greatest defeat came not from the board or the press, but from a quarterly visit. June brought the twins to see her. She received them in her formal salon, back rigid. Su Min, remembering her earlier question, presented her with a drawing. It was of a large, beautiful house with a tiny, frowning figure inside. "This is your house," Su Min explained. "It's very big, and this is you. You look lonely." Madam Park stared at the drawing, then slowly she asked, "And how does one stop being lonely?" Minjun, ever practical, answered, "You come out of the house, you apologize to our mom, and you come to my soccer game next Saturday. My team is the Tigers." It was not a grand reconciliation, but the following Saturday, a black sedan pulled up to the youth soccer field. Madam Park emerged, alone, and sat in a fold-out chair June had left empty beside him. She did not cheer, she did not speak, but she stayed for the entire match. It was a beginning. The final, surprising detail emerged from the ashes of the old trust fund. The original $2 million bribe, invested and untouched for 8 years, had grown substantially. When Yoonjae liquidated it to fund her foundations, the accountant discovered a recurring, anomalous deposit. Every month, for the past 8 years, an additional $5,000 had been quietly added to the principal from a separate, private account. It was not part of the original agreement. The source was traced back to June. From the very month she disappeared, even as he entered his arranged marriage, he had been anonymously paying into the fund. A silent, stubborn atonement, a message in a bottle he never thought she'd open. He had never stopped trying to provide for her in the only way left to him. When Yoonjae confronted him with the statement, he simply said, "I owed you more than they did. I just didn't have the courage to send it with my name attached." It was the confession of a coward who had never stopped being in love. It changed nothing, and it changed everything. Yoonjae did not return to France. She opened a small, respected midwifery clinic in Seoul, specializing in care for foreign-born mothers. She built a life that was entirely, proudly her own. She and June co-parented with a careful, respectful partnership. Some evenings, after putting the children to bed, they would sit in the garden with tea. They talked about the children, about work, about the wearying beauty of the life they were piecing together. The love between them was not the grand, reckless thing it had been. It was something quieter, more durable, a deep, abiding trust forged in the wreckage they had survived. They were not a family in the traditional sense. They were a coalition, a peace treaty with 3 beautiful, thriving clauses named Minjun, Su Min, and Jae-hoon. The uncashed check was never destroyed. Yoonjae had it framed, alongside the first drawing the twins made of their new, messy, extended family. It hung in her clinic's waiting room, not as a trophy of vengeance, but as a testament. A reminder that some debts are not meant to be paid with money, but with truth. And that sometimes, the most powerful act is not to cash the check, but to return it, forcing the world to finally account for the true cost of its transactions. The Park family's fortune bought many things, but it could not purchase silence forever. And it could never erase the truth written in the faces of 2 children who walked into a funeral and inherited, not just a name, but their own story. So what does this story leave us with? Not just a tale of revenge, but a blueprint for what happens when silence expires. The Park family believed every human complication could be solved with a transaction, a signature for a secret, money for a memory. They operated on the old, brutal logic that power is the ability to make inconvenient truths disappear. Yoonjae and the twins who were her living rebuttal proved that logic has a shelf life. The most powerful asset isn't wealth or influence, but patience. The patience to wait, to grow, to become undeniable. The uncashed check is the perfect symbol. It represents a deal where only one side showed up. You can offer payment, you can dictate terms, you can even deliver the cash. But you cannot force the other person to accept the reality you're selling. Enduring silence is not consent. It is often just the gathering of strength. Yoonjae's 8 years of quiet weren't compliance. They were the incubation period for a truth too big to stay hidden. She understood that while money can build walls, only truth has the gravitational pull to eventually make them crumble. This story also reframes what we think of as a legacy. The Park patriarch spent a lifetime building an empire of steel and glass and stock valuations, believing his legacy was a name on buildings. His true, unintended legacy was the trauma that forced his son to become a different man, and the resilience that brought 2 remarkable children into the world. A legacy isn't what you build for people. It's what you build in them, for better or worse. The twins, Minjun and Su Min, inherited not just a famous name, but a lesson in courage from their mother, a lesson in regret from their father and from their grandmother, a masterclass in the loneliness of absolute control. Which of those inheritances will shape them most? That is the real story just beginning. We are drawn to these narratives of return and reckoning because they speak to a universal hope, that time reveals, that hidden things come to light, and that justice, in its own messy human form, finds a way. We want to believe that the arrogant are humbled, that the quiet are heard, and that love, even when buried, leaves a signal that can be found again. This story satisfies that hope, but not with fairy tale simplicity. The happy ending here is fractured, hard-won, and shared among people who will bear the scars forever. It's an ending built on painful honesty, not romantic denial. So let this be a question we take with us. What is the uncashed check in your own life? What agreement have you silently rejected? What truth are you patiently waiting to speak? What version of yourself are you quietly becoming, despite what the world tried to pay you to be? The power isn't in the dramatic confrontation at the end. It's in the quiet, daily decision not to cash the check, not to accept the offered version of reality. To hold out for the truth, even if you have to hold it alone for years. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of the strength it takes to hold a line or the cost of staying silent, we want to hear about it. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us what moments stayed with you. And if you know someone who needs a reminder of their own strength today, share this with them. Help us grow this community of stories that matter. Like, subscribe, and we will see you in the next tale. Thank you for watching.